Start?
Yep.
Okay. Let's get started. Okay. Welcome, everyone. All this board work session to order. Borrow this agenda here. My computer's still starting. We're just going to start with roll call and then go to public comment.
Ms. Cosby.
Here.
Mr. Kleinens.
Here.
Mr. Zylstra.
Here.
Mr. Bonema. Mr. Moss.
Here.
Present. Mrs. Curran. Mrs. Rhodey. Mr. Bell. Mr.
Here.
Helm. Mr. Bergman. Mrs. Miedema. Mr. Chair, we have a quorum.
All right, wonderful. Up next is public comment. It's a great opportunity, if you're here from the public, to come forward and address the board for up to 3 minutes. You can start by stating your name and jurisdiction. We would love to accept public comment.
Hey, my name is Joe Spalding. I vote and live in Holland Township. Right now, today, the Dow Jones is up 270 points, which I don't think has anything to do with the DNC going on, but Kamala Harris did give one heck of a speech last night. One of the things that I think is super important that she talked about is that she is going to build 300 homes for Americans, which is directly affecting and fixing the housing crisis that while you guys have been pursuing trying to fire our health director for over a year and all other sorts of nonsense, you guys neglected. And now y'all are talking about housing a little bit here and there, and I understand that, but I've watched you all learn 4 times, especially Gretchen, 4 times about Prop A and how that affects taxes in Michigan. And it's super disappointing for someone who cares about that issue. So I'm happy we have a leader with a spine of steel that's actually going to stand up and run this country in a way that's going to allow us to help address that specific problem that deeply affects people in Ottawa County. But I do want to talk a little bit about some weird politics. I'm so sorry, Roger. There is a situation in Ottawa County, and I've been talking about it since day one, since January 3 of 2023. I thanked you profusely for splitting the Republican Party in half, Joe Moss. I thought that that was great of you to nominate somebody as crazy as Karamo, because I knew that was going to take corrective action from the top down and a lot of resources in order to address, just like every bit of damage that you've done to this county. But when it comes to your political future, you all are facing a choice right now. Gretchen, I'm sorry you lost, but Sylvia is going to lose in November. The Democrats are lining up. They need to turn out 2 precincts of GVSU voters. They've got a solid plan, and they are going to do that. They are going to roll you in District 8, right? That's the Democrats. The person who has been rolling you, that beat you in the primaries, is Pete Hoekstra, and you know that. The only long-term solution you have is to punish Hoekstra, specifically in the Huizenga race. You have to punish him in the Huizenga race and make him lose, or Betsy is going to keep coming to town and throwing money down and beating the crap out of you in elections, Joe, and you will be a flash in the pan. Roger, his little anti-election his election denialism, that's going to burn out. Like, there is no chance that the election that elected you fairly didn't elect Roger fairly. It was just a mistake in the media. That's going to be a wasted expense. The only way for Roger to punish Betsy for the same thing is, and I'm sorry, this is true, to make sure Angela Stanford Butler wins. If Angela Stanford Butler wins, not only does Betsy back off to some degree, but you have 4 years, and this is from your perspective of looking at the Democrats, finding mistakes from your perspective that you can point out, and you can circle back in the next election. Otherwise, you get boxed out. You get crushed by these same rich assholes that did it to you in the primary, and they're going to keep doing it again, right? You've seen me talk about the Democratic Party in Ottawa County. You've seen me talk about the problems there. I know that. You saw my picture with Samwise Gamgee too. And I know you guys want to have a political future and a say in Ottawa County. I'm not here to shut you out any more than Joe is here to shut anybody out of speaking at this podium.
Thank you.
But you have to change what you're doing, or you will get shut out by Pete.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to address the board?
Bob Spayman, Blendon Township. It's a beautiful day in West Michigan, I tell you that. Governmental budgets can be hard to understand, especially to the average resident, with all the transfers in and out, charges for services, rent, and other line items. I like to think with my over 20 years of experience in government, I have a good understanding of how budgets work. Call me a geek, but I love this time of year. But first of all, as I said a year ago, the budget is the interim county administrator's budget to defend. Karen's team did a great job in putting the package together, and the board has to approve the budget in a month, so that's theirs. So for now, it is Anderson's to answer any questions. Not Moss and his little sheep, along with the non-Ottawa Impact members. They ask questions at this point of Anderson's. My comments and questions are, was there a strategic planning session like there used to be with all board members and department heads? Bottom line, there is an amount taken out of fund balance in FY25 budget in the amount of 2.2 million, whereas the FY24, there was a $500,000 surplus. That's a 2.7 million difference. Explained that it was for a one-time expense, but nonetheless, it is a deficiency. You budgeted you benefited from a high inflation rate in FY24 and 25 for taxes to add 5%, the maximum for the taxable rates to homeowners in those years. Next year, it'll be more like 3%, and it sure affected my wallet in paying taxes. At least contingency seems to be more reasonable this year. Healthcare expense has a 3% increase, which is low, unless there is a reduced benefits for employees, or employees are contributing more, or there was a change in carrier or something else. We just finished my budget for my employer, Hope Network, with 2,500 employees, and we settled on a 15% increase, which is much higher than 3. I am also on the finance committee at Sandy Pines, and their increase was 9%. Looks like the amended budget includes the money you took from the health department unrestricted retained earnings this year. In other words, transfer in, and somewhat giving it back in 25. Transfers out. Is that a fact? And I'll save the rest of it for the final comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to address the board? All right, seeing none, we'll move on. And next up, we have communication from staff. The Director of Fiscal Services proposed changes to the recommended FY 2025 budget. Set the.
Good afternoon.
Afternoon.
Karen Karasinski. There is, Tyler is getting more copies. We didn't realize everybody would want a hard copy. So I apologize. Started at
Oh,
this end,
sorry. I thought,
moving its
I
way.
thought finance guy had it gotten. I apologize.
Oh, I didn't take one. I just passed it.
Okay.
I already have one.
He's making more copies. So, since, we presented the budget earlier this month, there has been, a change that I wanted to update you on. Actually, two things that I wanted to mention. I'm going to pass around. Each year, we complete 2 cost allocation plans. One is for the IT services. The IT is an internal service fund, so it's an internal service. It almost acts like a private company in that it charges all county departments for services provided, and that's the revenues that drive the operation. So there is a internal service plan that provides a revenue stream for that activity. And so we were still reviewing those plans as we presented that budget, and we discovered that there was an error. We work with an outside consultant, and we wanted to correct that error, obviously. And the adjustment is in front of you for the recommended budget. So the corrected plan, the corrected charge to the departments would be lower. So even if we didn't change the budget, I'm only going to be able to charge what the appropriate amount is. So that's an update, and the difference would be $476,000 lower than what was in the budget. And so just making you aware that those changes are there. That, that is, so that's a potential change we could make, or if we left it there and another cost came in different than what we had planned on, obviously that would be the first place we would go and use that funding to reallocate it to where it was needed. So that is the first thing I wanted to make you aware of. The other thing is, there is $2.2 million of revenue from the delinquent tax fund included in the 2025 recommended budget. This is consistent with historical practice. It is a combination of a general fund and debt service. So annually, the delinquent tax fund transfers, I think, $650,000 to the general fund. It is a transfer at budget to really offset for conservative revenue estimates. And it's not one that we generally process. And so it's not really one that ever really comes to be, but it's there and it's budgeted. The debt service is one that we do transfer, and it does support our debt service. So, but there's $2.2 million of revenue from the delinquent tax fund in the recommended budget. This practice is being challenged, and I just wanted to let you know that I've asked corporate counsel for a legal opinion on this. And so this matter is under their review, and I'm expecting that opinion back. So just updating you on the status of that matter, because we're kind of in between. At this point, I don't think any necessarily until that opinion comes back, not proposing any changes, but we would, need to respond to any opinion that they have.
All right, thank you, Karen. Appreciate it. Appreciate the updates. Anything else you want to add right now? We'll see what kind of questions come up today.
I have no other updates.
Oh, okay, thank you. All right, so we are moving towards item 5, work session items. So we basically today have discussion, work session discussion on the budget, things you've noticed, questions, maybe questions on variances, kind of whatever you're interested in. I think it might be helpful to just start with a very high overview of what, the budget currently looks like, either from John or from Karen, maybe compared to last year, what kind of increase are we looking at, or any other high level comments or commentary that you'd like to add?
Just a little bit of information here with what I have. We're looking about, the financial health still looks pretty good. We're roughly about $1 million, it looks like, off from anticipated revenue with projected expenses. And, what with fiscal services can also, tell you is that these are proposed or anticipated revenues and anticipated or expected expenses also. So it's not necessarily that we were going to need $1 million to balance that budget. It's just that as it stands right now, it looks like it's how it would work. It's roughly around 8%, between 8 and 10% of an increase. Now, I believe Karen explains this a little bit better than I do, but some of the reason it looks like a little more of an increase is in years past, apparently we have used excess fund balances from whatever department it is and kind of rolled that into the budget. Now, under the new policy, which I do believe provides more transparency, it's going to actually have a little more of an appearance of having to take more or take it directly from the general fund as opposed to how it rolled over. That is how it was explained. It looks like that why we have a little bit more of an increase or it appears. Other than that, obviously I've only been here for 5 months, but I've seen what's happened in this past fiscal year. There were some, a 6% increase in salary for the staff, and we have 4% more coming at the first of the year. And I don't disagree with that. I mean, the economy's hit everybody pretty hard. Additionally, along with economy, cost of goods and services, cost of healthcare have gone up. Just since the time I've been here, we haven't really added a lot to the budget. I think you were last year around, 3.5%, I think we had an increase. So doesn't look to be much different other than the way we've run the fund balances now. If you've seen your packets or if you've noticed, and we had some position requests come through from all the departments. Community mental health did get a majority of theirs approved because they came in with funding. They're all Medicaid funded or have some other kind of funding source. The recommendations that I've made with the fiscal services is that for now, we are not recommending any new other positions as we stand right now, just to keep that budget as balanced as we can. That doesn't mean that in the future here, if some things change with whether it's a new funding source or some of the revenue does change, we can't add them at another time. We've listened to all of the directors or department heads, and I've taken their what they've said into consideration. But for right now, my recommendation is we don't add the new positions. That, of course, is up to the board to make the final decision.
Excellent. All right. Thank you. I mean, that's exactly what I was hoping to hear, kind of just high level. And that's sort of where we're operating today. And so I guess to get us started, I'll just open it up to any questions, any feedback from board members. And, we're here for discussion and ideas. So anybody want to get us started? Doug?
Yeah, I'll just go through some of the changes. And the sheriff is not here, but do you know what the Vital Core contract is? Because that's a $1 million upward revision, right? And I think that's for
It's for their
healthcare at
Yep.
the corrections,
Correct, the healthcare corrections.
right? So what does that contract look like that it's $1 million increase?
That is to provide medical care at the jail.
Right,
And so as I understand it, we actually met with the provider a year before the contract was complete, as they were suggesting that their costs, and they actually asked for an increase. We said we had another year under contract. And they kind of gave us a heads up that costs were increasing and that
Right.
what they were seeing, and that we had under our current contract, a very good deal.
right.
And so we went out to bid, or we did an RFP, and we saw that contract costs increase. And so I think that contract is actually back here. I think it actually was presented. I think the sheriff was here talking about it. I'm sorry,
Yeah.
to remember.
We just talked about it like a couple weeks ago, and
Yeah.
and from what you just said, that's what I recollect as well, is that we were getting a pretty sweetheart deal. Because originally when we contracted with them, they were new. Again, I'm just repeating what we heard, but we were getting quite a significantly low cost. And as the company has grown, it sounds like they're one of the leading companies providing these services now. They've expanded and their costs have increased. And so we're seeing an increase.
So we're seeing that in.
But even comparable to, so we still check the market.
Mm.
So in that contracting process, they were still very competitive in their rates. So they're still not, I mean, it's not like we stayed with the same vendor and their, the cost is higher than others.
Mhm.
They're still competitively in line.
Okay.
Thanks, Karen.
Yeah.
Um,
Commissioner
Judge?
Zalstra, too, you can look at the last Finance Committee meeting because Sheriff Kemker was present and he did, this question was asked and he gave a nice thorough detailed
Okay, I
explanation
appreciate that.
too.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, all right. Who's next? Any other questions? Gretchen?
Building usage.
Yeah.
Assessment. And, our CMH meeting today, we were learning that CMH is feeling very constrained in their space. And I know that there are other departments that feel the same way. A year ago, we asked for a building usage survey, and I know, John, you weren't here when we asked for that, but we've talked about it in the background a little bit. Are we anywhere in getting a building usage survey or assessment?
We
No.
have, the last few months, between me and facilities, we've met with most departments, tried to take some assessment about what their needs are, as well as do they have some space they can either give up or can we make some moves? With the CIP committee, we're trying to make this where can make one plan so we're not making several moves and having to make them again. As of right now, CMH, it does look like, at least on their clinical side, they have some needs, definitely have some space needs. Department of Public Defender definitely has some space needs. We're working on that. And then the Veterans Department is essentially homeless. And those are the top three right now we are working on. But we do want to make sure when these moves come, because there's another one with probate court moving their operations to Grand Haven Court, that, we utilize all the space correctly so that we're not making, moves now, then a couple of years from now, having to make more moves. So it is a process that we are working on. As far as mental health goes, that one's maybe a little trickier if we're trying to keep them all on site there, but that might take a plan just to reconfigure what they have. But it is part of it, and it's part of the CIP committee so that we can, again, just do this correctly so we're not having to make moves again in about 2 years, 2 or 3 years.
Sure. So, and I thought that we had allocated some funds, maybe to have a third-party vendor do this work.
There has been someone that's come in, and their name just escaped me, who's tried to assist with the space allocation. What space would work best? And again, we've had some of that, and we're using it right now with those moves from the probate court to Grand Haven. And then now we have some space left at probate. And it's not just how much space we have, how can we best utilize that space? And that's exactly what we're trying to do, is maximize that space.
Making sure we're not heating and cooling space we're not using,
Correct.
managing. Thank you.
Question, John?
Yes.
What's happening with the space across the street that the probate court is vacating and, the juveniles, is vacating? Is over to the Family Justice Center? What's happening with
Some
that
of
space?
that we are actually looking at for veterans. But they don't need that big of a space. I
Yeah, that's a lot of space.
thought juvenile wanted to expand. I think the prosecutor wanted to expand a little bit too. And that's just it. We have some big rooms there, some that we want to, utilize the best.
Courtrooms, right?
Right. And that's where my initially, at least the initial thought was that was a good space. And I've talked with Jason from Veterans that might be a good home for them over there.
A lot of space.
It is, no, again, not just for them, but yeah, that was just, since as far as I kind of concerned, they're kind of homeless. They kind of have been since, it sounds like, they've just been sharing space with the health department. Getting them in there, but you're right, there is other space there. And I know the prosecutor, and I believe it was Juvenile Services, wanted to expand into some of that space also. And again, we just want to make sure we're not doing this where we're making some moves today and then, 2 years from now, making the moves again. We were trying to get this where we get it right the first time.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Real quick, John, you mentioned that CMH CMH had some personnel requests that are being approved, and that's because that was coming from Medicaid funding. But what were the other personnel requests? Like, how many total were there that we're kind of holding off on at the moment?
On the,
Just in
countywide?
general, yeah.
I could tell you, we got it.
And
on
if you
this.
want to send that, that's fine. You
It's
don't
in the
have to.
back.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
Okay, it's, yeah.
I believe it was 77. Yeah, so you could. take a quick
Some
look.
of them you'll also see, again, these are recommendations, we don't have the authority just to deny these, but just our recommendations for now. Some of them you'll see a WS, which stands for wage study. And these were, a lot of those were positions that are, people are, or department heads are requesting maybe an upgrade. And it was best, we felt, to have that go through a wage study to make sure the position would match what they're asking for.
We get a reminder of how the public defender is funded. Is that 100% from the state?
Not 100%. We're, okay. If you want the actual, yeah, percentages,
it-
Karen might have the actual numbers, but they do get quite a bit of state funding.
Okay.
Even with this new expansion, no, they have room where they are on James Street. And when I've talked to Nicole, she believes we can probably get most, if not all of that funded, the new construction from the state.
Go ahead, Doug.
Yeah. John or Karen, just on the increased rent payment to building authority for 300,000. What was it before? It says 1.8 million for last year, but then it says 1.8 for, I maybe I just don't see that right. I'm just looking at the debt fund. The rent was 1.8 million.
What page are you on?
I don't know if I'm on the right page, but I'm on page 62. And that's for the debt fund. And I just don't know if that 300,000 is a response to something, or that was kind of just a planned increase in rent payments. Uh, 62 of the recommended budget. I mean, I downloaded it from the website, so it's not out of the packet.
It's 62 in the budget as well, the printed.
Oh, okay, cool.
Same.
But I'm not sure if that's the right thing.
I guess, I guess I don't know, my page 62 is not that.
I don't have that either.
Sorry, Karen.
I'm not sure.
Well, there's the debt fund and then
Building
there
authority
is,
debt fund?
No, it is a different.
there's another one.
It looks the
which
same to me.
is-
The figures are.
There's one point, that is the, so the bill, that is the rent that the county pays the building authority,
Right,
and the building authority then pays the debt service.
right. So that is the correct fund. So when it says here, $300,000 increase in rent payment, that is the fund that it goes into? Or is that the construction project fund that it goes into?
No, it's not the construction project, it goes,
Into the debt.
so the 300,000, I'm not sure. I think the $300,000 is referencing something else. So, the, delinquent tax fund was paying, I increased the general fund 300,000 and decreased what the delinquent tax fund was supporting of that debt service. So maybe maybe
For
you're
family
seeing that
justice?
Mhm.
Okay. And now they backed off and we're just going to the general fund for that 300,000. So it's
So
not,
the debt service isn't changing, it's just where it's being funded is
okay.
changing.
That's my question is all of a sudden, why are we getting $300,000 more? But it's just changing where it's coming from. It's coming from general fund as opposed from,
To help to,
that makes total sense. Yeah. Thank you. And what is the annual debt service? Is that it? Is that the 1.8 then? Okay. That's why I was like, there's 300,000, but I don't see the change.
Mhm.
So there is no change, it's just change where it's coming from.
correct.
Thank you.
Karen, I know I asked this before. Speaking of debt, do you remember what that county debt load was, total debt? Sorry.
Was it 50?
54? In my other notes.
We, when you asked last time, it's a note in the financial statement, so the number I gave you was as of 9/30. 23.
Yeah.
So long-term debt note is number 8 in the statements.
Okay.
And the primary government is total debt was 48.7 million.
Okay.
And then there's also Ottawa County Public Utilities and Water Resources there as well.
And that's actual county debt, right? That's not township or anything that the county's backed.
That is county.
County, okay, thanks.
The public utilities debt is, that is, I think, what you're referring to when we,
Yes.
the full phasing credit of the county for the water systems.
Yep. Okay. Thanks. Doug, yeah,
Yeah.
go ahead.
The canteen vending service contract, that's renewing at some point in fiscal year 25? And that's going from what to what? Because it's a $200,000 bump there too, right?
I think that contract has already renewed in 24.
Right, but then the bump is happening sometime in 25 or at the beginning of?
It probably has annual increase because it's food service and the cost of food has
Right.
increased.
Okay,
So, I can't remember the exact amount. It wasn't as high as the medical. I'd have to look at.
yeah, no, those are the just two things I saw, the 200,000 and the 900,000 for those two things.
I think the 200,000 is probably between adopted 24 and
Okay.
25.
Okay,
So
cool.
I would guess that it would be probably a similar type increase
Okay, cool.
between future years.
Do we just kind of go?
Yeah, keep going. Just open for discussion.
Yeah, so we're just talking about the wage study, the 150,000. That's something we're paying for next year then, Zach, or? It doesn't matter, Karen, and we're just kind of going through the changes more than anything else and
We just did the wage
take out
study, right?
the big numbers.
Yes, we started contracting in 2020 for a wage study.
Right.
The last wage study was done through 2021 with results implemented in 2022.
Right,
Historically, we've done them every 5 years. With
Right.
the market volatility, we're doing it it'll end up being about 5 years by the time we do the wage study, which will take about 9 months. And then we are hoping to include it in fiscal year 26 budget, like the results from the wage study.
sure.
So then it would go into effect January 1st of 2026, any
Okay.
changes.
So trying to connect what John was saying is there's a lot of positions here that seem to be dependent on the wage study.
Our recommendation was we wait for the wage study to
So
ensure.
it's not an
that-
automatic, if the wage study says this happens, it's more like, well, wait
Correct.
to see what the wage study says. And then we'll make the determination on those specific positions.
Correct.
Okay, all right, cool.
There are 16 positions that are under wage study.
Why is the 150,000 in the budget this year or for next year? We're prepaying for it?
So that's
Or that's the
for us
beginning?
to
start the
hire
process?
a firm to do it, the consultant.
All right.
We talked briefly about departments that had larger increases. I think there were a few. Just maybe get any feedback that's available at this time. Equalization, is that a fairly big increase due to increased contracts that the county's taking on?
They did have, a recall, it was fairly recently, we took on Georgetown on their contract. That was a pretty good, increase there. So for them, again, it's contract position, so they're paying for those positions, but it does show as a increase in our budget.
And then we're picking up those positions because basically we're contracting, and that's why we can afford to bring those.
The revenue comes
But we kind of
in.
need to have those.
Right, similar to what the sheriff's department does.
Because there's
with
only like
contract.
5 or 6 new ads, and 4 of those were equalization, so.
Right,
and
and those,
that-
they're contracts, so they'll be,
Kind of bring their own revenue
correct.
along with them.
Yeah, should be roughly cost neutral on those, yeah.
Right.
And then just looking at that deficit that we have of $1 million, question was, is there an opportunity in some of these contracted services from the county to some of our townships to increase contract amounts?
I did talk with, I haven't talked with equalization necessarily about that with the sheriff, and a lot of the townships and cities are, as the sheriff had explained it, is they're pretty much maxed out, and they're having a little bit of trouble with trying to decide if they can increase those, and I think they recently had. Because I agree, I thought some of these things can be, if there's services being provided, but, fiscal has worked with the sheriff's department, and they work with equalizations to ensure we're at least getting the revenue to cover the services we provide. We're not necessarily making up any loss, but just so that it can come in as cost neutral as possible.
Is it leading to part of the $1 million deficit?
I think, again, a lot of it, and I can have Karen speak to it more, is again, just those cost of services that have increased. We increased our wages for employees due to, for some obvious reasons. We have an anticipated increase in health insurance. We're talking about Vital Core and the canteen services with the sheriff's department. Those are all anticipated some pretty big increases. So just generally overall, it's, in a budget our size, it's $1 million is a lot of money, but it doesn't take much to get there.
Doesn't. No, we had talked about a haircut possibly. I mean, last year I proposed 3% and everybody about fainted, but I mean, even a 0.5% I think would help. We did some of the calculation there.
That's about it, and it's been floated, and I didn't get some of the best reception on that, but for reasons we have a lot of new positions requests, and I saw this from my previous county experience. You grow exponentially, or you start to grow, and there's more demand for services, but revenue doesn't always keep up with that, or at least as we continue to grow. So that's where it gets to be pretty tough, and the recommendations I would also give back to some departments is really looking at reorganization. Maybe some collateral duties and trying to work a little more efficiently.
I just wanted to make a comment about the sheriff's contracts as well. So we did increase those contracted rates during the 25 budget process. So there is, those local contracts were increased. We do it based on a rate for a deputy and a sergeant, and it's kind of all rolled in. That is, so those costs of services are tracked in a separate fund, so you'll see it. And so the activity, the contracts, the charges, the expenses related to the activity are all charged there. So it is increasing that rate really just builds up that balance, if you will. So it's not, unless you were going to increase it, unless there was additional charges there, for example. So we charge the things related to providing the service to the fund, and then we recover the revenue. Does that make sense?
I think I understand. Yeah. Thank you.
Commissioner Beedema.
John had mentioned health insurance. I just wondered if we could have a high-level conversation currently, what the county has for health insurance, how often we shop around. I know in typical businesses, I know for my own personal, we have someone different almost every year because we're trying to make sure through my husband's line of work that we are, getting the best that we can for the employees, but also caring for the business practice. So balancing the two.
Yes, and this is actually one of my favorite things to talk about because I get to talk about hiring and wages all the time and not health insurance so often. So thanks for having me up here to discuss that. Ottawa County definitely has a unique set of, for health insurance anyways. We've actually had white papers written about how we design our plans in order to involve employee consumerism. So making sure that employees are paying attention to their healthcare costs rather than just saying, well, this is a great plan. Now I'm going to rack up the costs. Which is then passed on to the employer. So we had some great county leadership in the past that have brought that and that employee consumerism in, mostly through the implementation of high deductible health plans. And so we've had those for about 12 years, probably about 14 years now. Right now we have 4 health plans. They're all through Priority Health, and the health plans are set up in different ways. We do have one high plan, which the employees are currently paying 26% of the full cost to be on that plan. And then we have some other high deductibles with varying deductibles, high deductible health plans with varying deductibles on there. And of course, the employee share changes for each of those. Just to go back, like a little bit of history on our health insurance increases. So at times when we were seeing the market with 8% increases for health insurance for some of our other local municipalities that we talk with on a fairly regular basis, we were way below that. So in 2018, we had a 1% increase, and I'll just go all the way up to now, 1%, 0%, 0%, 0%, 6.84, then 10% increase. So Ottawa County has had an awesome track record with keeping its health insurance rates low. And once again, that's a big contributor is employees and them taking charge of their health care within this. I do have this chart, which I don't have copies to pass around, but I can kind of show you. So this top blue line is the national average for the cost of health insurance for employers. This is provided by Gallagher Benefits. They're our broker and our consultants. This orange line down below are local governments in this area, and what they're trending as. Ottawa County is clear down here in the blue. And actually the Michigan legislature passed Public Act 152 a long time ago now, and that was to help, partially, it was to help keep health insurance rates in check, making sure that whatever the governing body is of that local government had to say and understood what they were providing to the employees. And only one time have we had to come to the commissioners because we were above that cap. And it looks like for 2025, we'll be below that cap again, which is great news.
You had mentioned on the high deductible plan, the employee pays 26% of the cost.
That's the high plan. So that's kind of a traditional health insurance plan where you just pay co-pays. So $25 if you go to the doctor. The rest of the plans are high deductible health plans. So our highest deductible is a $6,000 for family. And that one is a free health plan to employees. Of course, their deductible is $6,000. So that's substantial. But it does allow us to it helps with recruiting. We can say that we have a high deductible, or we have a free plan that's premium free, but the deductible is higher.
And, you know, I'm from the health system world, and so I just saw this recently, comparatives of the different health systems in our areas. A 60-40 seems to be pretty standard, with Trinity Health being 70-30, just as far as employee paid deductible.
Oh,
For the non-high deductible plans?
Those
Is
are the
that-
plans, yeah.
Do we do any of those?
Are we self-employed, are we self-insured?
we used to be, we are fully insured right now. And that's something that we evaluate every year as well to determine if we should save on admin costs. Of course, there's costs if we become self-insured, along with a lot of additional liability that the county would assume through that. And so just one of the popular plans is $3,200 deductible. The employee pays $37 a pay period to be on that. So that's just an example of one of the other plans that we have as well.
When you're self-insured, I mean, having a wellness and prevention program is really important to have, but yeah, there are a lot of factors that go into making that determination, age of employee.
Yeah, absolutely. We're always looking at what are high cost claimants, like what happened there. We have regular quarterly meetings with our broker to look at what's going on. We definitely notice when there's 2 preemie babies that were born and we were like, what is going on with their claims? Oh, well, that's just a one-time incident. Hopefully that doesn't keep happening. We see musculoskeletal disorders increasing. And so we're looking at for plan year 25, what type of programs can we implement to really get at the root cause of the issue? So just for example, musculoskeletal disorders, a big cost are physical therapy. So what does it look like to reduce those costs for physical therapy? Is there some type of online program that they can participate in? Can we look at centers of excellence to make sure that our employees are going to centers of excellence so we know we're getting the best bang for our buck? Those types of things.
Excellent.
Quick, I have a related question. If employees opt for one of the plans where they're paying, somewhere around $37 a month, and you said the deductible was $3,200. Have you looked at, so that's a nice benefit for employees, a nice way for retention and to just give employees additional benefit. It also seems like it's very, very low cost compared to the market. Like if I go out and buy health insurance for my employees, or if they go out independently, they're looking at like $600 a month or $1,000 a month. Is there any discussion around changing how much employees contribute to some of these plans? Is that a factor?
Yeah, it's definitely something we're always talking about, and I'll talk about a couple different things here. So the first is just our wages overall. We don't compare private sector wages to our wages here. We compare to other local governments, which has been historically slightly lower than private sector to make up for perhaps the benefits difference. In addition to that chart I was showing, Ottawa County plans are so much lower than industry, not only the private sector, but also local governments in this area. So just the employee consumerism has helped keep millions of dollars off of the books here at Ottawa County for that. And so we want to make sure that we're being fair in that way as well. Something that was implemented a couple of years ago was something called the CHA, or the County Health Alliance. And this is a partnership with the different unions, and it's all within their collective bargaining agreements. And so once we get initial rates and we figure out some plan design changes, which we do on an annual basis, we bring that to the County Health Alliance and we talk as a group. All right, this is what the rate is for next calendar year. What can we do together to look at that? And just within that language alone, the county pays for the first 3% of a cost increase, and then any remaining cost increase is split 50-50 between employees and the employer. So there are some mechanisms built in already regarding that.
So Zach, when you're calculating cost of a position or an FTE, what's the average rate for benefits that you calculate in?
Yeah, so it does depend if they're on the pension plan or the DC, but on average, it's between 35 and 40%.
Health system, it's about 25 to 30%, just to give you an idea.
Rebecca, go ahead.
Real quick, you mentioned that it was $32. That's per paycheck, not necessarily per month, correct?
37, yeah.
Or 37.
Yeah, per pay period, so
Okay.
26 pay periods in a
Yep.
year.
Got it. And then so they have the deductible of 3,500. Does that include discounts for the individual? Or are they paying full price every time they go to the doctor? How does that work?
Yeah, so they would pay the full cost until they hit the deductible.
And then it's 100% covered after that?
Correct.
And you guys also have those health savings plans, or, yeah, they can go to the bank and open up a plan and put a portion of their paycheck
Exactly.
to kind of save up for those costs. Yep.
How many total insured do we have here?
Yes, I don't know the number of lives covered. We have roughly 940 full-time eligible employees. I believe there's about 860 employees that select our health insurance. And there is an opt-out payment if people do not take the health insurance.
And the larger your employee base, usually there's a lower percentage, I believe, just to answer a question that was posed out here, or statement, lower percentage of increase for the policy. More lives covered, usually you get a better rate.
Sounds very helpful, Zach. Thank you. Other questions along these lines? I will say it's excellent coverage. It's very good.
It's like the third rail. You don't want to touch it.
Don't get too close.
Thank you.
Thanks, Zach.
So, Karen, the solid waste cleanup fund, why did we see that big increase from, last year from the 420 to, 762, went up $312,000? I don't remember what that was about.
I'm sorry, which page are you on?
The page 73, solid waste cleanup fund.
Yeah, 104, yeah. Looks like it went up in 24.
Right.
So we amended the budget in 24,
Yeah.
just recently?
Yeah.
So, yes.
What was that
So-
about again?
So, the closed landfill.
Yeah.
We are maintaining that site.
Right.
There is both the operations and then some capital investment,
Yeah.
along with the resource centers. That originally, a few years ago, we were on the path to
Yeah, but
amend the way our solid waste plan was funded. So we consolidated those. And because as you can see, this one-time funding that the board had set aside years ago, the solid waste cleanup fund was the fund that the board set up years ago to maintain the closed landfill. But this was set up, I believe, from the funding from a lawsuit, was well before, or settlement, well before my time. And it's been paying those operating costs of the closed landfill. So we were in anticipation of this and being spent down. We were prepping to set up that differently. Some infrastructure needs were needed at the closed landfill. So that was all in process. That did not get approved by the Solid Waste Landfill Committee. And they were moving towards a contract that is currently under review by corporate counsel, or under negotiation by corporate counsel with the landfills. And so this funding was transferred in there to finalize a project that was an investment to maintain the landfill, an investment at the landfill, a capital project.
So it's 667,000 for the new budget.
Which is
2025.
both its capital and operating for the landfill. So it's still being used for its initial intent. It's just in this other fund because I haven't moved it back, because we're waiting to see the outcome of these negotiations and what the result of this is going to be.
Thank you.
Karen, can you just kind of talk about and I know Paul is not here, I don't see him, but the state groundwater grant increase, it's kind of hitting in three different places, both supplies, contracted services, and operating expenses. What is the story with that?
The groundwater grant?
Yeah, the increase. What does that mean? I mean, I don't,
I know it's a multi-year grant in
Okay.
which they're going out and doing groundwater sampling.
okay.
And so I don't know the full plans that, of how they plan to implement that, but I know they're doing sampling throughout the county. This is the grant, directly from the state. And they're working, I believe, with MSU, and collecting data. But, I think that, Paul would be a better one to
Okay.
answer that.
I believe it was already, it was approved prior and this is continuation or rollover.
It's a continuation of the grant. I think I think this
Okay,
may be the
so-
final year.
I guess I just confused when I saw the increase in the expense. It's just like us actually using the grant.
Yes,
Okay,
Yes.
that was that confusing part when I saw
yes.
increase.
It's
Why
a
is-
multi-year grant.
Right, I mean, I see it in the revenue, but now I see it, it's just doing the work.
Yes.
Okay, cool.
So that grant is separate from the settlement from the soils that we're doing additional water sampling.
That's separate.
And that's through our drain office or our water resources commissioner.
Yes. Separate.
Yeah, go
I
for it.
have an HR question.
Yeah.
I have a question for HR. So you mentioned the plans were, 37.50 every other week. But I'm just kind of looking at this, and I really do like the fact that our health insurance plans offer single person, two people and family. I think that that can be a huge cost savings for married couples. But I'm looking at this information and it looks like the most inexpensive plan that I see is like $267 per pay period. So I was just curious where we're coming up with the $37 per pay period. Actually, $219.39 is the lowest plan that I see for the 3,000, 6,000 HD, HP with HSA for a single.
So I don't have the total cost for that plan is almost $16,000. But the employee cost for the 3,000, 6,000 plan is $0.
What are you looking at, Rebecca? Do you have like an online
It's
login?
a sign-up form. I
Yeah.
mean, it's what we give all of our
Oh,
Oh,
employees.
are you looking at the commissioner health insurance? This is employee rates.
Oh, they're different. I see. Okay. Good to know.
Yeah.
Didn't realize that. All right, thank you.
The question, maybe for Gretchen or CMH maybe, that millage that we're currently using, it's about 10 million.
No, it's not that high.
No, it's not?
No.
Okay, but how long does that go for?
Goes to 26.
Okay,
We
Is
have a millage steering committee right now that's been reorganized,
okay, so it goes through 26.
be on the ballot in 26. Property taxes did go up, but I don't know exactly how much, but I know it's not 10 million. Around 4.
But there's
It's
a
higher than that
steering
now.
committee working through it.
Correct.
It'll bring.
Yep.
Okay, great. Any idea on when we'll see something on the mental health millage? Sometime next year, maybe?
Been restructured just recently.
Okay,
I don't predict, Chris actually sat on the committee. I don't predict that being a long-term
okay.
committee.
Looks like it might be 8 million. Does that sound
Could be,
more accurate?
yeah, could be
Okay?
with the increase in property insurance.
Just to make sure that it's 100% clear, because when this was adopted in the last time, that is fiscal year 26, so that is tax year 25. So tax year 25 will be the last year for the CMH millage. That's on that L 4029 that you sign in June. It has the ending date. And so because it's billed in December, that funds their fiscal year 26. So it's very confusing because tax year and fiscal year are different. So if you say 26, it just
So it's
can be very
FY
confusing
'26
for
and not
people.
voting year '26 is what you're saying?
Right, so I wouldn't want to confuse and
25.
think that it was tax year 26 when it's,
Hmm.
because it's tax year 25, which will be billed in December of 25 is their last billing, which will fund their fiscal year 26 budget.
Okay, no, but as far as the voting and the balloting is concerned, it's in '26.
That sounds
was
like. it could be on the-
implemented in
That would be,
16, a
there's
10-year
probably timing
millage.
that could be done as long as they meet a certain deadline
Okay.
before December of 26, I would imagine. There's a number of options.
Great. Just curious. Thanks. All right, anybody else? I guess I'll highlight one minor thing, just a comment really. So, we go into budget season and look at, recommended budget. And I know we've talked about this before, but they're always changing. I believe we probably approved somewhere around 260 million originally off the recommended budget for this current year. And I think we'll probably end closer to 300 million. Is that possible? Something like that. So there's changes up, could be down, but there will be changes to what we're working hard to finalize.
How long is the opioid settlement fund? How long is that coming in, do you know? Is 25 the last year?
I don't think so.
Do you know, Karen?
I think it's I think it goes on for quite a while. I think they spread it out, I believe.
20 years? No.
There's multiple settlements. And I think we just
Have
signed
the
them.
newest one, right, but I think that hasn't hit yet.
It's confusing because
for it.
they have 18-year settlements, but then they pay 11 years at a time. So it's a little confusing about the payment plan that they're on, and there's many of them. So, but 25 is not the last year. And with all the new ones coming on, you'd have to roll it out. We've gotten estimates. There's a law firm that is managing all of these suits, and they've given us estimates that we've shared with CMH, a group that's looking at that funding and opportunities for that SUD treatment. And so we've shared some of those estimates with them, but they've given us estimates out. I can't remember how many years, but there's still many years to go.
All right, thanks.
I have a question. Oh, go ahead, Doug.
Karen, I know you, no, sorry, you can stay there. I know you explained this tons of times, but so we're looking at a general fund use of reserves of 2.2 million, right? And then explain to me, like, planned use of fund balance versus department underspend. What does that mean in English? I'm sorry. Like, are we going to the general fund for 2.2 or for 1.2? Sorry.
No, that's okay.
I know you explained it tons of times and my head just doesn't get
No,
it. so.
I'm happy to sign it again. So, $2.2 million. So it's been historically, departments do not spend all their budget.
Right.
And so with the exception of fiscal year '24, we didn't need to do it. So fiscal year '24, we didn't do this, but I think almost every other year that I've presented a budget with a county administrator, we've done this. We've appropriated $1 million of fund balance. It allows us to end the year where we intended to end the year. So it's been discussed with rating agencies. It's acceptable. They've understood what we're doing. And it's not ever been a problem. So the $1 million of department underspend, that's the $1 million of underspend. The planned use of fund balance is the settlement funding for the PCB dollars that came in. Dollars come in. When you're in accounting, they close and they're not in revenues, current revenues, they're in our fund balance, they're not in current resources. And so if you're spending those, they're not in current revenues. They're in a savings account or fund balance or call it. So when the board authorized that testing, that 5-year contract with Soil Conservation District, there is a Soil Conservation District contract in 2025 that's being funded with that planned use of fund balance because it's that settlement dollars that already came in. It's in the savings account. It's been set aside for this type of expenditure. And so that's a planned use of fund balance, different from department underspend. The board has had a long history of setting aside funds for future use for something specific. It's at the back of note 1 in the financial statements, if anybody cares to see the long list. It's planning for, things that we know are coming or liabilities. So that's the difference. Does that make sense? So that's the $1 million. And then I think there was really a couple things with that PCB money.
Helpful. Ron.
Don't sit down yet, Karen. Sit down yet. So, you've been around for a little while, so you know the answer to this, I think. Back in 2018, 2017, I think, we funded completely our public defenders by ourselves, correct? You remember those days? And we didn't have a department. They were appointed by the judges, correct? And it seems to me that that number was, the cost then was a little less than $1 million, that cost. Do you recall that? The reason I'm asking that is when I look at this Public Defender's Office fund, I see the 950,780. Is that what we are contributing and the balance is contributed by the state? That's what I thought. Okay.
Right.
Just so people know that, this $5 million or $6 million that is the total of the revenue is our contribution is that 950 number, correct?
Yes. So that amount was set, they took a 3-year average when they
Right, of
started
what we
that,
were spending.
of
Right.
what we were spending, and that was how we started, and they were increasing it by a rate of inflation.
Yep.
And even the last few years, they've even not increased it.
more.
So they've
Yep.
held it, the state has actually held it constant. So that 950, I think, has been the number for the last couple years.
Yeah, it looks like it. Yeah.
And so that is the county's cost of the public defender's office.
Right. Right.
And it's a grant.
Yes.
from the state.
So Karen, when Public Defender's Office wants to hire or do some sort of expansion, that is gonna be paid for by the state eventually. But what, the approval mechanism is here and at the state, or how does that, remind me how that works again? I mean, just because we're paying $950 maybe in perpetuity, they can't just tack on 10 million, right? There has to be some, right? I mean, so my understanding is that they would like to do something with their current space, right? And how do they get that done? And because we were assuming that the state would eventually pay for that, right?
Well, I think if they're still doing it the way they did when we implemented,
Mhm.
they, this particular state office, because they all don't do them the same. They like to pay for it in advance. So they do not want to pay. So in those cost allocations, a lot of plans pay depreciation. So we build the building and then we charge them over time for whatever reason. The public defender doesn't want to do that. They want to pay for it up front, and then we have to subtract out depreciation, and they don't want to pay that. So they prefer to pay for it up front. So if they're still doing it the way they did it when they implemented, their preference is that we would estimate the cost, they would approve it, they would pay for it.
But then it comes to Ottawa County to kind of sign off on that for the state to pay?
Well, the board would need to appropriate the funds and recognize the revenue. So the board would need to agree and
Agree, and then the state would also have to agree with us to say that we'll pay for that.
Would be coming from the state.
coming from the state.
Right,
just
because
like
we're
a
not,
grant.
we're not paying any of our, when we weren't putting in our own money, we'd be basically approving the state to pay.
Incoming.
But they're also gonna put a check on that as well, right? We can't just say, hey, we need 2 million, and they'll be like, cool, here's 2 million. Right?
I'm assuming they're gonna understand what they're paying for and
Right.
see the estimates and.
Okay.
Yes, sir. Mhm. I have a scenario question. Let's say inflation continues, we hit recession, and the next 2 to 3 or 4 years, we have a less favorable economic outlook. Not saying our current one is that great, right? Have we looked at possible scenarios of what that, what might happen, what might occur, to be prepared in advance, anything like that? I know revenues aren't going to probably change on a dime since we have some pretty specific revenue streams, but if we had a big dip, do we know, has there been any discussions like that? Times are good, so now's the time to have it.
That is something, we are talking about, and is, we've, far as, long-term strategic planning is looking at, first of all, what are the projections for the increase in anticipated increase in the population, but also what could happen to the revenue and, or, the economy crashing or getting into a recession. This is when it becomes incumbent, I think, to really start, looking at the reorganization and really maximizing efficiencies, making sure there's no overlap, and even if it means combining departments sometimes. There's been some drastic things I've been through with a previous county where we did some of that. Not that I want to be any more less or liked than I already am, but I would love to say we may at some point have to look at the benefit package too. I think it's phenomenal what we offer here, and it is a good recruiting and retention, but 40+% is pretty high for what we offer. I mean, and for long as we can do it, I think we should, because it does help us retain and attract good people. But if the costs keep going up, if it's becoming a little more difficult, it may be something that's going to be a tough decision or tough discussion to have, to see if we need to get those a little more in line with what most or other municipalities are doing also. And it looks like, I finally found the documents I just signed, the Kroger settlement for the opioid crisis or settlement, starting this year goes for 11 years. So we'll have that, some revenue stream coming in from that for the next 11 years.
Go to CMH. The opioid dollars, does that go to CMH?
The health department too.
Programs or need to focus
On
on,
opioid.
well, or some kind of drug rehabilitation programs.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, there we go, Karen. will-
The state has a separate fund that they have, their uniform chart of accounts, so we've deposited there, and I think you'll be seeing a contract soon. It's from a group, I believe a group that represents multiple areas within the county, and they've come together, so I think it's from multiple groups within the county.
Because one reason I ask about, another thing I noticed is that it would be very interesting for us to review how spending has increased in the county over time. If you go back to 2016 and grab the 2016 budget and adjust it for inflation, and since 2016, we've increased, the county budget has increased by $100 million. Adjusted for inflation. There's a lot of discussion in Lansing, Washington, and other places about runaway spending. I'm not saying we have runaway spending. I'm saying that we have a lot of spending. So it'd be very interesting and probably very appropriate for us to look at what has changed in Ottawa County with a $100 million increase since 2016. Our population back then was maybe 283,000. Now we're at 300,000. Population growth at first glance does not seem to have necessarily made adding $100 million in spending justifiable, at least not at first glance. I would be very curious to see if the county could put together some information on what areas have grown the most. Maybe analyze, some of those areas, increased spending is going to be philanthropic, right? We receive grants for parks and things like that. There's probably increases there. And I would assume the county board is a little less concerned about park spending. But I am interested in the other, $95 million. Any thoughts on any of this from the board?
When did we start the CMH here? Has that been around since then, or because I mean, I don't, if it's the total budget, if that's also counting like contracts
Total.
and,
Total.
like with CMH, they bring in a lot of revenue, which, but that still adds, if it adds to that number, same thing with, sheriff's contracts, equalization contracts. So still was something to certainly look at, but some of it could be that too.
Yes,
Right.
yeah, I think so.
We've
Yeah.
added a lot of contracts with municipal governments in the county,
Right.
including the sheriff's department, but also some of the other things that we.
Right, and it adds. I mean, even though the revenue's coming in, it's gonna add,
Right.
the budget's gonna look bigger, right?
Yes.
Yes,
Right.
And
yeah.
then
Doesn't mean that
also
we're spending general fund necessarily.
$5 million in that public defenders.
Right, and that's a lot of money coming in,
It's all new.
right?
There's been some really big changes in the past several years, last 8 to 10 years. I think one thing that represents is an ongoing commitment to spend and also a centralization of power, right? The more the county does, the more power the county has. So it would be appropriate to review some history and look at the changes to gain a better understanding and see if there are things that perhaps the county should divest of or send back to townships or, anything like that. I think there's a lot of questions that could be answered.
I think it's a good idea to look at it, Joe, to look at the spending overall.
Well, in 10 more years, it'll be $450 million, right, for our budget.
Always a good idea to assess the finances.
Right.
If we go back, about a decade, maybe a little less, there was an encouragement coming out of Lansing that, you know, local units would work with their counties. So as Roger mentioned, you know, a lot of those local services have kind of disbanded, you know, especially in the police function. And I'm sure that that represents a big expense, but there was sort of a desired approach for municipalities to look at ways of
Saving money.
saving money, you know, combining resources, you know, multiple departments of public works kind of joining together because they, you know, kind of do a lot of the same functions. So I think there's probably a percentage of that effort that, you know, comes into play.
Significantly, yes, yeah. And it's very easy and sometimes appropriate to continue to consolidate functions, but we should also be aware that the more we consolidate up, the more we're also consolidating decision-making. And it's no longer at the local unit of government. And so I'm talking about, you know, maybe to the tune of $50 to $100 million, something that we don't know offhand. But I guess what I'm saying is, while there has been, you know, encouragement from the state or from others to centralize power and control and spending and savings, if you will, up the chain, we should look at it and see if it's really been the best decisions, or if we could empower our local units to do things in ways that maybe they want to do. Maybe there are options there. Maybe there's certain local units that would like to take something on, but can't currently because of their own budgets. But the closer government is to the people, the better. And so I'm trying to help, I want to recognize that in our current trajectory, we are continuing to consolidate power up. And I would like to look at how do we empower the local units below us. You know, one area, and this is not a perfect example, but one area is elections, right? We have centralized all election management at the county. I'm not sure the local clerks, I mean, they're really overworked. They have a huge amount of responsibilities, and the state keeps adding to their responsibilities, right? At the same time, while encouraging the centralization of the management of elections. So are there any townships that would like to have a, you know, greater hand in their election process? Is there any way that we can take that as a principle and look at the principle so that we can better serve the people? Because we're here to serve the people. And yes, we do need to save money, but we also need to make sure that we are operating in an appropriate way. That's one major thing I would like to look at a little bit in the short term and definitely in the long term to see, you know, just to validate, has it gone well?
I've paid attention to the numbers, the early voting numbers, and they are really low. I don't know if anybody else has looked at that with the centralized polling stations. I mean, significantly so. And I know it's a requirement by law, but doesn't feel like it's the best use of our dollars or taxpayer dollars, honestly.
Oh, yeah, that's
They're
true.
full separate, 4 separate polling stations, right, or voting stations, for the early voting. And
Yes, yeah, and I didn't mean to get too into the weeds, but I agree. I think that'll continue to be looked at.
Correct.
Yeah, that example was on my mind from a recent meeting, but there's lots of other examples.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. Mhm. Any other thoughts? Any other questions? How about debt retirement? Can we talk about debt retirement a little bit? We got about 50 million in debt. Could we put a plan together to be debt-free by 2035? At the current juncture, I mean, we're probably going to carry debt for what, 20, 30, 40 years? Maybe the plan is to kind of forever carry debt a little bit, kind of normal. Karen, do you know the term on some of our long-term debt? Are we talking 20 to 30 years? Offhand? We just added a chunk for the Family Justice Center.
We're actually very close on a few years away. Pension bonds, fiscal year 28. I think fiscal year 28 is there's three between the refunding, which is the Grand Haven Courthouse, the Holland Courthouse, are both prior to that or that same kind of time frame.
Hmm.
And then the pension bonds are also fiscal year 28. So those are the big ones. And then obviously the Family Justice Center, the newest one, and that is 25 years. So that is the biggest one that's will remain.
So in the next 3 to 4 years, we might actually see maybe a sizable decrease
Yes.
in the total. That's great news.
And then you have to, for debt repayment, you're really looking for those specific days pre-built in to pay off. They don't, I forget what it's called, but they don't let you just pay it off
Yeah.
anytime. I think there's actual key dates that you can do it. I'd have to check, but.
Very structured.
Karen, there was some buyback dates that we were looking at also, correct?
I know there's only certain dates that you can refund, so
Correct.
you gotta
Yep,
watch
yep.
the rates and there's a, but I guess I'm not sure about just flat out retirements. I don't know if they follow the same as like refunding or if they're different. We engage with a financial advisor and bond counsel on those types of things, so they would be key to have at the table.
What was the total approximately for the Family Justice Center?
It was a $30 million.
30?
Mhm.
Okay. Okay.
So one more question, Karen, sorry. So does that mean if Family Justice was 30 million, does that mean in 28 we'd be done with another 20 million between those three things? The three that you just mentioned?
Say that again?
I'm sorry. So if 30 million is a Family Justice Center and you just mentioned a couple things that will be done within 28, I'm just wondering like what do you know what the total amount is will be done with in 28 as far as in dollars? Not sure.
I don't know that. I
Okay.
don't know the outstanding balances of each one of them.
Okay, just curious.
I'd be really interested for the board to be able to see some of that high level information, to kind of understand, where it's at. That would be, I think, very helpful. Yeah, and it's not a huge amount of debt, right? And it's well within recommendations and best practices and things like that, right? The auditors don't feel bad and the rating agencies look at it, all right. But at the same time, if we are, we're doing well as a county. And I sort of feel like if this budget just, passed today, I feel like everybody would probably be relatively okay with that. And so is there a way to kind of balance, maybe just to put just a little bit of pressure where there should be, right? We serve the taxpayers, not ourselves. So is there a way we can eke out and pay off the debt a little earlier? I guess I'm just wondering about different creative things we could possibly do. If there's economic downturn, there's no debt. Anybody think we might be heading for economic downturn? Let's hope not. Jacob.
Yeah, I think there's been some great discussion. I think you brought up some good points to think about, mull over. Debt retirement is always good. Getting the government closer to the people is always good. One of the questions I receive the most often when I'm out in public is questions around legal fees, legal costs. there's been so much that's been said out there about, what was typically spent to cover in-house counsel. I know that we have several lawsuits that are still pending. We don't know how those are going to finish. But maybe there could be some discussion today a little bit about what was budgeted versus what's been paid for legal counsel. And also a discussion around what gets paid from our budget versus the insurance authority. And just kind of bring some real numbers, real discussion to clarify, are we having rising legal costs due to lawfare that's taken place over the last year? What does that look like? So is there any discussion that we can have on legal fees?
I have one quick comment I could add. I don't have all the numbers. I did have a comment I had recorded here for prior corporation counsel, billed an average of about $20,000 a month to the OCIA, the insurance authority. And that's about 24,000 adjusted for inflation for 2019 to 2020. Looks like our current council has billed an average of about 21,000 per month to the insurance authority. So you could say it's in line with prior years. You could maybe say, at least as far as the insurance authority goes, it might be a little less. So if that helps, I don't have all the numbers or anything in front of me, but I'm sure we could get more.
Can we get an all-in comparison? Combining both numbers, both budgets, and do those side by side over maybe the last 5 years to kind of see a trend?
It'd be really nice actually to just do that countywide, just so we can have some quick, eyes on high level of departments. And I know you can't account for every change within, by looking at variances, but that would be something that would be very helpful, I think, to the board and to the public, is to say, where have those variances trended over the last, 5 to 10 years? I don't know if our software does that easily, or if we're talking about a big project, but it seems like, depending on where the budget software is, perhaps it might be doable.
Is that something that finance could provide for us?
Oh, we could do it at the next finance committee meeting, maybe.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, the finance team, is that doable?
Yeah,
Oh.
that's the question.
2025 budget compared to
You're looking for like a 5-year kind of trending? Do you want department by department, or what are you looking for specifically? Not just legal, but others?
Just department by department to kind of continue to build context around our overall budgets. I'd love to go longer than, 2020, if it's easy to just look at, if you can pull 2020 to 25, can we just pull 2015 to 25?
Yeah. The
kind of
question
new
is it
software
relatively
trending.
easy, Karen, or is it something that is going to be a huge project for you?
Okay. Well, that'd
That's
be okay.
fine. Yeah. And will it trend out that far then for you? Okay.
And granted, there are significant changes in departments and things shift or change, so we won't be able to account for every detail by looking at those variances. But if there were any questions, then we could go and ask them. Yeah. Mhm. Overall financial position, what is like around 200 million, probably. So like our net position is somewhere around 200. I think that's what it was last year. Like, as far as rainy days goes, like we're on not in panic mode.
right. So I guess, I probably look at that different, so I break out. So I guess, are you talking about all funds, everything?
Yes.
Yeah, so I probably don't look at it quite the way you
Okay.
do, so I'd have to kind of go back and validate.
No
that,
worries.
but-
Okay. Bottom line, no one's panicking at this dais. So we should be very thankful. And continue to do our best to manage costs and, yeah. Work for the taxpayers. Anybody else have anything? A lot of great discussion.
You threw me when you said, how long has CMH been on the books? I'm like, you're talking about the millage, correct?
Mhm.
Okay. So I'm like, I think for a very, very long
Very
time.
long time.
Mhm. Yep.
Yeah, one thing on that, I was looking up the CMH budget and autism is like $5 to $6 million. And so I think that that particular component
Hmm.
of CMH is probably one that has significantly increased in the past 10 years. So,
Oh, the
so there are some
population.
factors, like pretty specific factors of things that have changed, in our community that definitely have contributed.
The aging out of autism, the increased numbers of autism.
Mhm.
And right now, I mean, like, we have a housing deficit in the community, but we especially have it for this particular population as well.
Wow. And that's not going away.
No.
No.
Increasing. Well, we consistently add, $5, $8, $10 million a year to our overall budget, maybe more. I'd be very curious to look at what does it look like if we cut 10% of our budget or our general fund, or, what happens? How much does that affect the taxpayer? Right? Our services rendered? I'm sure that people in the buildings would feel it, right? Why not look at something like that to at least identify the scenario and say, look, if something were to happen negatively, this is option B, plan C kind of a thing. And honestly, I think, I'd be interested in looking at it just to see if it's possible now. Why not? Why not look at it? It's kind of my perspective, at least. We're going to keep growing by 10 or 20 million a year, so maybe we should take a different perspective. Anybody else have any thoughts, or we could wrap this up? Next up is public comment.
Well, I guess just one other thought to piggyback on that would just be that I don't think it would hurt for us to ever just be looking at, what could we do to reorganize? Where can we be more strategic? Are there any cost savings available anywhere? And just overall, that should always be our thinking, not just at budget season, but we should always be thinking about how can we maximize what we do for our people with the resources that we have.
I know that is a major consideration for people who, work in the county and who are responsible for departments. And, I think of CMH and others, it's, they're there to serve people. Yeah. So I'm thankful for that. Okay, are there any members of the public who would like to add additional public comment?
Karen Ovitz, I vote in Spring Lake Township. This is going to be a comment in reference to what I could hear of conversation regarding elections. It is very hard, just as an aside, to hear almost anything that is being said among the board members. Just an FYI, it's probably easier to hear what's happening here online, but if you want to be here to make public comment, you have to really strain to formulate your thoughts about that public comment, because you can't hear very much of what the commissioners themselves are saying, just an FYI. But what I heard about the decentralizing, I guess, of elections or something, the early voting is still very much a decentralized process. They just are in contract with the county. Michigan has the most, or among the most, decentralized process for conducting our elections, to my knowledge, of any other state, which was one of the reasons why when Michigan voters passed the Promote the Vote Proposal 22.2, calling for things like early voting, there was a greater challenge to all of the individual municipalities in charge of their local municipality elections processes to find a way to most cost effectively make that early voting process work. And thence the county contracting with those county municipalities was floated as a way to both make more efficient and more cost-effective that early voting period. But to my knowledge, each municipality is still putting their workers into those early voting centers. And one of those municipal clerks is still the supervisor of that day in that early voting site. So it is still very much a close to the people process. It's just an expanded access to the voting box. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else who would like to address the board?
Well, I shorted my last comment that I was going to make. And I came up with it. But good meeting, Joe. Did a good job. Very good. What I wanted to say was that rating agencies like governments, nonprofits, to have at least 90 days fund balance on hand to pay bills. In FY '23, the general fund was about 94 days. In FY '24 budget, it was about 89 days, so very close. But in FY '25, it's 81 days. Kind of a bad trend. Maybe it's going to be in the 70s the next year and so on and so forth. I'm not sure you were aware of that, but maybe you were. And the last thing I wanted to make was, it looked like there was about 25, 30 employees that were denied in this budget, and probably closer to 30 than 25, but that would be part-time, full-time, all the ones that were requested. And I'm just thinking of next year, is it going to be 40, 45 employees? So just watch out for that as well. It's kind of working on the directors that they're working more and with less resources. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to make a public comment? Welcome.
Hi. My name's Dave Barnowski. I'm sure you've never heard of me before. I vote in Port Sheldon Township. I was having a hard time staying awake, Karen. If you could get a really raspier voice or something, that would really help me out. But seriously, I had a lot easier time as soon as I heard Joe was interested in having something to do with elections. You should keep your hands off the elections, Joe. I don't trust you one bit to going anywhere near them after I saw what happened with the Ottawa County GOP and the recommendations committee, or whatever the heck that was. I forget what the heck you called that. Kendra Wenzel should put up with her accusations that recently made it to CBS National News, or she should stop making those kinds of stories in public, in front of cameras. Roger Belknap is paying a portion of or is offering to pay the portion of the recall fee. And he's paying the fee that's required, but he's not paying the full cost. He's going to prove that the election was done fairly, because I looked at all the I watched most of the canvass. I looked at the individual precinct totals. The only precincts you won were Robinson Township. You lost Spring Lake and all of Grand Haven, and they were all pretty much the same. That was a very believable set of totals for me. You could still walk away from that if you want. Smart to, but you'd be doing us a favor to stick with it, though.
Sheila Detloff, Holland Township. That was a really interesting soliloquy that you had earlier, Joe. I find it really interesting that you're suddenly concerned about consolidating power at higher levels of county government immediately after you lost your majority on the board. I also want to reiterate what Karen said about hearing people. These microphones move. You can talk right into them. Sylvia and Gretchen, you were nearly impossible to hear. Sylvia, you were impossible to hear. I caught nothing of what you said at the end there. Gretchen, most of what you said, I could catch words here and there and kind of get the gist. Both of you tend to go like this, and then you talk to whoever, and then you're away from the microphone. If you could think about that, we would really appreciate it out in the audience. Thank you.
Are there any online public comments? All right, I'll call this meeting adjourned. Thank you.